Okay, folks. So today we have a very special guest with us, Miss Amy, who, when I first met her, I thought was just way too cool to even talk to me. So I'm looking through her profile. She's affiliated with a number of organizations, all doing wonderful things. And she's just another example of a good human doing good work to really make people feel safer out there in the world, particularly in the world of work. And so I'm really excited to have a conversation with her today to talk a little bit more about her experience with workplace abuse, how she pulled herself out of that, where she's landed now, and what kind of gives her hope for the future. And so, with that, Amy, would you like to kick us off with a few words that you'd like folks to know about you?
Oh, sure. I'm happy to do that. I am an environmental scientist and marine ecologist, so I have spent the last 30 plus years of my life in mostly aquatic environments, so things like lakes, rivers, springs, wetlands, oceans. In addition to being my professional workspace, it also happens to be a personal passion for me. I absolutely love the outdoors and was raised by two parents who are conservationists and appreciate the wild. So that's kind of where I come from.
Yeah, no, and I'm going to share a few photos of you because it's just like it looks like Indiana Jones stuff. So very, very cool. So, but I know that the pictures don't always tell a whole story. For so many of us that go through these experiences, we may show up in public a particular way, but privately things can be a lot different. I know you and I have talked before where we both have this in common where we both had some tough experiences. Tell us your story. Like, what was it like when you were dealing with workplace bullying, and how did it impact you?
Yeah, for me, I think there were some red flags in the beginning when I was recruited away to come and work for this organization. But because, it was closer to home, it came with a nice pay raise. I overlooked some of those and thought, perhaps I'm just being too cautious. But then, once I got in there, I think the warning signs were emerging and maybe a little bit slow to develop and difficult for me to realize the extent of the problem. Bullying behaviors like snapping at staff and criticizing them when they were following directions exactly. Those were things I witnessed it with the crew that I managed and the supervisor that we shared. So those were a little bit alarming. But what got really concerning for me was when the attention, obsession, boundary violations all were directed at me. And I realized at one point I was in a really unsafe space, being watched at conferences from some place where I didn't know where my supervisor was, but was sending me inappropriate texts that he could see me, what I was doing. And then, I confronted him immediately. I don't have a problem standing up for myself. And I said, look, this behavior is unprofessional. It's scaring me, and you need to get help. And when I did that, my leave was cut. So that's when I realized that the space I was in was not safe. The supervisor I had was not willing to self-reflect and to receive any feedback. And these behaviors are not normal and they were not acceptable, certainly not professional. And so then, I realized, thankfully, I had proof that I was at work when this person said I wasn't. And then I had to escalate my complaint to HR and to the C suite executives. And that to me was a very revealing experience because I realized then and there that there was a culture of blind obedience that was expected from the top down and no commitment to honoring, the values that they claim to uphold that really just hung on the wall as wallpaper.
Yeah,
um,
familiar. Yeah.
yeah, and so I eventually I came to the realization that my leadership skills far exceeded those that were above me on the org chart, and that's the point that I said, I'm not going to tolerate this anymore, and I finally left. So I had given them plenty of chances. I was employee of the year for my whole
Hear that a lot.
organization.
Mhm.
And then the moment that I needed help and I recognized there was a problem and I, went through the proper channels of addressing that and asking to be kept safe at work, um, that's when the situation turned and the blame was shifted to me rather than, their accepting responsibility.
So sorry. And an all too common story. Just curious, because I know we had talked before, when this happens to employees, it can feel incredibly isolating. It can feel like you're alone. And a lot of times we're in the dark when this comes up, because this may be a once in a lifetime event for the employee, but employers have outside counsel on speed dial. They understand the rules. They know where things are hidden. They know what they have to share, what they don't have to share. Is there anything that you feel like you've learned through this process that maybe you would do differently, or what advice would you give to somebody that you wish somebody would have given to you when you were in a moment like this?
Sure. I think, excuse me, the one thing I would do is, the moment that you realize you're in an unsafe situation and you ask for help, if it isn't addressed immediately and the problem isn't solved immediately, then you need to leave. I think that sends a loud, strong message that they have no desire to fix the problem. They would rather, mask it, cover it up, call it something else, call it a communication problem rather than harassment, bullying,
Mhm.
retaliation, manipulation, gaslighting. I mean, looking back, I experienced it all. Um, and and I tolerated it way longer than I should have, but I kept trusting the people at the top that surely someone is going to step in and do what is right. Surely someone is going to take care of this. Now, on my end, I also had a wealth of professional help available to me, both from the medical community, for mental and physical health issues that I suffered related to this, and from the legal standpoint. So, getting those people in place is critical, I think, to helping you get through the problem if you're trying to stay at the job. I mean, my situation was I was in a job that I absolutely loved. I had a lot of colleagues I adored and still do. I supervised a crew of 10 guys who I loved working with them and I know the feelings were mutual. But the problems were above me and that became a challenge that, you know, I couldn't fix because I wasn't their leader. And they weren't willing to do it. So, the other lesson too, I think for employers is that when you don't take care of problems and become major culture crises, good people walk away and they
Absolutely.
leave.
And the bad people stay. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. No, I'm
Yeah.
so glad that you had resources, particularly around, medical support, because I
Yes.
think it's so, so critical for folks that may be experiencing this to go see their doctor, not just to treat the harm, because it likely is affecting you more than you realize. And sometimes it's not till after you get out that you realize how much you really suffered, but it also documents the harm. In a way that's done, in a more neutral way that's outside of your organization. And two, to also just keep timelines. For HR folks, they get really spooked when someone shows up with a very detailed timeline because that's the first thing lawyers ask for. And so people who take contemporaneous notes tend to win in credibility findings. If you say, if you make a note of, oh, I just had a conversation with my supervisor, or if you follow up in writing and it's now timestamped, because what you're really trying to show is that you informed the company that something was hurting you and they chose not to do anything about it. Because I've been right where you were, like, I do the right thing. I address problems. Surely those above won't. And what I have found, unfortunately, over the years is there's the least amount of accountability at the top, and that those who write the rules tend to write them differently for themselves, or they enforce them differently for themselves.
Yes.
And the relationships get more close, they get more personal. And so they don't always want to act as swiftly as we would like or we deserve. So I'm really sorry that that happened to you. But
Thank you. I
yeah,
appreciate that. And I think you definitely hit the nail on the head that the rules change depending on where you are on the org chart if you're in a toxic or abusive workplace.
yeah,
I am so thankful that I've had other workplace experiences where healthy cultures are not only expected, but they're modeled by top leadership. And
Yeah.
and that is so important for a variety of reasons, including, things like retention and
Mm.
productivity and healthcare costs associated with your employee benefits and such. So it makes a big, big difference.
Absolutely. And even lawsuits, we
Yes.
find that a lot of times, these toxic environments are just, hotbeds for discrimination for, people who are just unchecked with their anger and their unprofessional behavior, crossing lines that tie to protected characteristics, which can lead to really significant claims. So glad you point that out. But now that we know that that's not you, talk a little bit about where you are now and, did your past experience, kind of lead you to this place where you decide to go out on your own? Does it shape how you function in your day to day now? Um, what's the second part of that story?
Yeah. So when I resigned, I was in such a bad place mentally. I didn't see me going to work for anyone else because I didn't trust anybody. I had seen one, two, six people above me fail to do their jobs and
Yeah.
fail to uphold not only legal responsibilities, but also the core values of just keeping a healthy and safe workplace. So I decided to just shift gears and I thought I'm going to create my own environmental consulting company. And my goal was to get a client within 6 weeks. And I got my first client within 10 days of leaving.
Outstanding. Oh,
and
good.
and so that was before I had established, a website. I hadn't really advertised. I was really giving myself, time to start the recovery process and healing because as you know, that can be lengthy
Mhm.
and can be very difficult, even with good help. It's a long and arduous process. But that consulting company just took off and I'm so grateful, to the clients. I'm also grateful because my previous job, I had a lot of contact with people in the community, residents, and all of those relationships that I had built over the course of my previous years of employment at the um, toxic workplace ended up paying off for my consulting business. So,
Oh, wonderful.
yeah, that has just taken off by leaps and bounds. And, in terms of financial health and wellness, I guess, far more successful than I was at my previous job, which is great. Not only that, my schedule is my own. I prioritize my mental and physical health.
Love that.
And I don't have to answer to anyone else about that, which is really rewarding. And something, I think that's critical for me in the healing process is being able to help other people. So
Nice.
thank you for all that you do with end workplace abuse and the other organizations that you support because it's absolutely critical. Yeah.
Thank you so much for mentioning that.
Sure.
And same to you. We at In Workplace Abuse, one of our main thing we focus on is the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. And so we've made good headway in over 20 states where we have field crews working with lawmakers to get this bill introduced that would make bullying unlawful, that essentially would decouple protected characteristics from the harm, because there's so much research that shows that the harm is actually bad enough on its own. You shouldn't have to be a mind reader to prove that it was done because I was a woman or because of my faith or my race or ethnicity. And to me, what's always been the most disturbing is if you have a real bully boss, they can just be mean to everybody, and now it's no longer unlawful. And so the harms are just tremendous, as you've pointed out. And we now know that it leaves scars on the brain. There's been brain studies that show that the levels of PTSD that employees experience is the same with combat veterans. So really, really, kind of serious stuff that I'm glad to see be addressed. And you are a co-signer for the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. So really grateful to you for that, because over 200 organizations have signed on now. And not only is that tremendous, yes, thank you. And and so helpful when we're talking to lawmakers. But also too, it becomes a home for a place that we also like to celebrate, because you are who we want people to go work for, and you are who we want people to go do business with. You're a model employer, and I think celebrating you and all the good work you do, and the fact that you care about not just yourself but also other people, is really, really amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. It's super important to me. And, backing up to what you said about the damage on the brain, yeah, bullying has the same, physical and mental impairments as a concussion or a physical head injury. And I was diagnosed with anxiety and PTSD from my workplace experience. So, um, since then, I have kind of dived into learning more about the physiological impacts. When I was going through that, I noticed my blood work changed significantly at my doctor's office, even though my diet patterns didn't change, my exercise didn't change, but the extreme level of stress that I was under, and constant and persistent abuse took a toll physiologically. So, and happy to say that all changed back to normal when I left. So,
Wonderful. Yeah,
yeah.
that's good. And I'm really glad you pointed that out for people to hear. Um, yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's really great news. And so what gives you the most hope for the future right now?
So, for me personally or professionally? Okay, me personally. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is I know workplace abuse takes a toll on the family. And at the time I was going through this, I had two daughters. I still have two daughters, but they were in middle school and upper elementary. They were acutely aware of what was happening to me, um, and the toll that it took on my health, our family structure. It was really challenging for everyone. So, for the future, for me personally, I am so proud to be able to show them, that I walked away from something that was harmful. I started something that was new. I accepted those challenges head on, and I succeeded. And I want them to know that, a, a lot of the reason I did that was because of them, that it's important for me that they see that happening. Um, Professionally, I'm going to, continue with my environmental consulting business. Service is a big part of my life, and I've always been in nonprofit work. So for 20 years, I ran a nonprofit that was dedicated to scientific diving and technical diving expeditions around the globe. It was called the Cambrian Foundation. Love the organization. I still remain active as an advisor. But through my work with the Cambrian Foundation, I was introduced to Schoolyard Films. And Schoolyard Films is a nonprofit based here in Florida where we make environmental films for K through 12 audiences. And they're really neat. They're like 10 to 20 minutes in length, and they feature kids doing science and kids doing conservation and kids doing environmental advocacy, which is super neat, I think, to share with classrooms. And it doesn't hurt that the co-founder and cinematographer is a guy who has filmed a lot of Blue Planet, Planet Earth, Nat Geo stuff. So the quality is just, outstanding.
Tremendous. Yeah.
Yeah, but also, I also want to mention that is an organization super psychologically safe, dedicated
Good.
to, um, professional well-being as well as personal well-being, and values those, um, the things that we think are important in keeping people healthy, safe, and valued. So I'm really, really grateful to have landed in that space as well.
Wow. Oh, so many thoughts. First, way to go, mom. So,
Thank
I
you.
too have a teenage daughter. In fact, same, she was in middle school at the time, and the guilt that I felt over not being able to show up for her the way she
Yeah.
deserved, because it's so crippling, and you just come home and you feel like you've been beaten to a pulp, even though no one's laid a hand on you. But your cortisol's going and you can't sleep
Yes.
and you can't focus. So, my heart really goes out to you, because I know how tough that is. And she actually testified before the Rhode Island Senate Labor Committee when she was 15, talking about,
Wonderful.
yeah, how this impacts families and communities, and it's not just the individual. And bullying is not just something that happens at school. And
Yeah.
and like you, I wanted to be able to speak publicly without shame, because I think that
Yes.
that keeps so many people quiet. And we talked about that, like in kids, they're like, don't be a snitch. And it sounds kind of silly, but there's kind of an invisible piece of that in the adult world where we may not
Absolutely.
have, yeah, the childish name, but we have this strong perception that there must be something wrong with you if this is happening. So people don't talk about it. And I think that's why we're really dealing with almost like an epidemic that no one talks about. And so wanted to model that for her, that there's nothing to be ashamed of. We talk about these things, we speak up for ourselves and we speak up for others. And so thank you for doing that too. And because you're not just helping yourself in that space, but you're helping my daughter and,
Oh,
the whole next generation of workers, who I do think are way better than my generation. They don't put up with things that I did. And I'm like, yeah, you're really right. Like, we never said anything. We just did it.
I think this statistic I just read last week, 81% of Gen Z have already left a job for mental health reasons.
Yeah.
So I think employers, unless they prioritize that,
Yeah.
they're going to have their hands full with turnover rates that are exceptional
Yeah. A
and
hundred
good for that
percent.
generation.
Yeah, no, definitely kudos to this. So, but then for you professionally, I think one of the things I was so excited about for you is 1,000 years ago, I was a scientific diver. So I actually have a master's degree in underwater archaeology.
How
Um,
fun.
yeah, I got that from East Carolina University. I studied in Alexandria, Egypt. That was my big focus on the sunken cities there and the lighthouse that's under. I haven't been diving since I think 2004, but
We need to change
so
that.
yeah, I know, I know. Definitely need to change that. And yeah, I spent 2 years working at the Epcot Living Seas as a diver
Oh,
there,
yeah.
and we take people on school. So I was just like, I had so many fond memories going through all the stuff that you were doing. And yeah, like, but it is cool. And the fact that you're showing kids doing it is just so amazing. And really love that you're out there doing that. And so tell us before we wrap up, like, how do people get a hold of you? Because you're really affiliated with multiple organizations. So if you want to run through those, we can add some
Yeah.
a description in there too.
Sure. So for my I do public speaking workshops, leadership strategy consulting, and that company is called Giant Strides. So the website is giantstrides.org. If you have questions about environmental science, invasive species management, my environmental consulting company is called Aquastem Consulting. I called it Aquastem because everything that I do, most of what I do is in the water. And then STEM at the end is for the science, technology, engineering, and math. I have a huge passion for environmental education and, inspiring the younger generation to stay active and stay involved and care for this planet. So that is aquastemconsulting.com. And then the film company that I work with is schoolyardfilms.org. And those are I think the three main ways to get in touch with me. I'm pretty active on social media, on LinkedIn, talking about, science, leadership, environmental education. Those are, three things that I'm super passionate about. But yeah, happy to help however I can. And most importantly, I think people who are going through this need to know that when they experience something like this, it's, toxic workplaces don't happen overnight. They happen because leaders look the other way. They ignore boundaries and values they claim to uphold. And, you know, you can't fix that. So once you try once, and if they aren't willing to solve that problem, then it's time to put yourself first and choose another path.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for all the great work that you're doing. And thank you for chatting with me today.
Sure. Thank you so much, Kimberly, for all that you do, both on the advocacy side and legislative. It's so important, and I really, really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.